¿Qué tal? Muy buenas noches. Te saluda Genaro Lozano. Bienvenida, bienvenido a esta edición especial de Foro Global, Noche de Conversaciones Globales. En esta ocasión converso con una de las mujeres que son jefas de Estado y de Gobierno. Solamente hay una veintena en el mundo y actualmente Noruega tiene una primera ministra, Erna Solberg, quien se encuentra de visita oficial en nuestro país. Vamos a hablar sobre la relación bilateral entre México y Noruega, sobre Noruega y la Unión Europea, y también sobre Noruega y América Latina y por supuesto temas de género. Acompáñenos durante la próxima media hora. Esto es Foro Global. Gracias por continuar con nosotros en Foro Global. Como te comentaba, esta noche es una edición especial, una entrevista, una conversación global de viernes con Erna Solberg. Ella es primera ministra de Noruega desde el año 2013. Es economista, es politóloga, ha sido parlamentaria, presidenta de su partido. Pero para conocerla mejor, a este personaje global, te invito a ver el siguiente perfil elaborado por el internacionalista Juan Ernesto Trejo.
Moderar sus posturas políticas fue la estrategia que Erna Solberg consiguió para convertirse en la segunda mujer en gobernar Noruega. Apodada Erna de Hierro por su posición conservadora hacia la inmigración y tras la derrota de su partido en las elecciones de 2005, Solberg decidió implementar la nueva estrategia y pasar de la derecha conservadora hacia el centro. Según explicó en una entrevista, su partido, el Conservador, buscó que la gente dejara de verlo como un grupo que solo se interesaba en los asuntos económicos del país y fuese visto como uno interesado en la vida cotidiana de la población. Con esa nueva postura y un gobierno enfocado a impulsar el cuidado al medio ambiente y la paridad de género, Solberg logró ser designada primera ministra en 2013. En 2017 fue reelecta para un segundo periodo como primera ministra, con la promesa de aumentar los empleos y el gasto en educación y transporte. Noruega es uno de los 7 países con mayor PIB per cápita del mundo, gracias a una economía basada en la explotación de petróleo, gas y la exportación de pescado, que representan cerca del 60% del total de sus exportaciones. En 2011, Solberg publicó un libro titulado Gente, no miles de millones, en donde habló de dar prioridad al estado de bienestar de la población. El libro se enfocó en las agendas de empleo, salud y educación, temas que no eran usualmente relacionados con su partido, como sí lo eran la reducción de los impuestos para ricos y empresarios y los asuntos fiscales. El libro fue parte de su estrategia de moderación política, que logró la simpatía de la clase obrera noruega hacia su partido. Su postura respecto a la migración también ha cambiado.
The last 5-6 years, there's 100,000 people coming to Norway because of the wave of refugees, and we need to make sure that they also feel that Norway is the Norwegian values and ideas for them.
Solberg ha dado preferencia a refugiados de países en conflicto o en guerra como Siria, pero ha sido crítica del flujo de países que no lo están, como Bangladesh, de donde migran por condiciones de desempleo o pobreza. En los 3 primeros años de su gobierno, Noruega aumentó su población de refugiados, cerca de 30%, según el Banco Mundial, y ahora es el 9º país europeo con más refugiados, según el último informe del ACNUR. Esto a pesar de que el Partido del Progreso, miembro de la coalición que conforma el gobierno de Solberg, pide implementar una política migratoria responsable y más estricta. Solberg es parlamentaria desde hace 29 años, los últimos 14 como líder de su partido. De 57 años, es descrita por su familia y exprofesores como una mujer competitiva, sólida y confiable. Creció con sus 2 hermanas en el barrio opulento de Kalfaret, en Bergen. Estudió sociología, ciencia política, estadística y economía en la Universidad de Bergen. Durante su gobierno, ha promovido la igualdad de género. Después de Islandia, Noruega es el segundo país con menor brecha de género, según un informe del Foro Económico Mundial. Durante el gobierno de Solberg, Noruega ascendió del tercer al segundo sitio del ranking. Las mujeres son preferidas al momento de ser contratadas, se les impulsa para tener un entrenamiento laboral y alcanzar ascensos, y a los hombres se les obliga a tomar cuando menos 6 semanas de licencia por paternidad.
The most important, and this is for all the Scandinavian countries, is to make sure that you can have a family and career balance. That means that we have a long parental leave. Men have a proportion of that they have to take.
Solberg ha dicho que las políticas de equidad de género de su país le permiten tener un equilibrio en su vida para ser primera ministra, esposa y madre de 2 hijos. Para Foro Global, Juan Ernesto Trejo.
Prime Minister, welcome to Foro Global. Welcome to Mexico. Such an honor to have you. Is it your first time in the country?
It's my first time to Mexico.
What is your first impression?
It's beautiful and especially, you know, you have such a long history of buildings and city center, but I haven't seen very much yet. So hopefully I can come back as a tourist and see more of it.
Yeah. I know that Norway and Mexico have over a century of a diplomatic relationship, and we also have a free trade agreement since 2001. Is that agreement also under revision, just of the global accord that Mexico has with the European Union?
No, it functions well for us, the agreement that we have today, but if the European one is changed, then we will have to look if we should do changes in ours too, but we think it functions well. We have, of course, increased our economic cooperation the last years, especially after the energy sector reforms in Mexico, where our large oil company, Statoil, where the Norwegian state owns 2/3 of the shares, also participating and working here. And I think we today signed an agreement on fish farming and cooperation around that, which I think is a sector that will be possible to increase. And we have technology and know-how and can work together with Mexico to develop that even further. So there's a long range of areas to work with. In fact, we're also trying to get Mexicans more interested in the Norwegian music.
In Norwegian music, there's an app that you're also launching,
yes,
right?
we are launching.
Will you have a mariachi music?
Well, there will be mariachi. That's more traditional music from around the world, but it's also, but I don't, we see that there are a growing interest in the world on film, literature, and music from Norway too.
Sure. I know that Mexico and Norway share also some common objectives of the multilateral agenda, specifically the Sustainable Development Goals. And I know that you co-chair the Sustainable Development Goals with Ban Ki-moon, with the Secretary General. Are Mexico and Norway cooperating in those regards, in climate change?
We are cooperating on very closely in the UN. We have done a lot of different initiatives together, especially around multilateral organizations, UN reform, to make sure that UN is representative and a body that can make decisions. These days we see with the situation with the chemical attack in Syria, we see the need for a Security Council that can make decisions. Now it's stuck because two veto powers are blocking an investigating body to go in and see what really have happened. I think we have a long range of these initiatives where Mexico and Norway have the same view. We should have multilateral cooperation. We should have an international law-based system and a law and an international order based on the law and strengthen those international corporations more instead of what we see now, attacks to maybe weaken them because both on trade but also on other issues where, well, the U.S. withdrawal from the Paris Agreement is one of those setbacks that we have to work against, yes.
What about migration? There was also, there were talks in the United Nations last year about a global agreement on migration, and the US also retreated from it. And as you know, President Donald Trump is proposing a wall between Mexico and the US, and I know that you're visiting a migrant center here in Mexico City tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, this decision in the UN on migration is important. Because migration is very different now from the time when we were discussing asylum and the refugee convention. We know that a lot of the migration is economically, not politically or security reasons. It's because people want a new opportunity in life. I think it's very important that every country has the right to decide between what type of rules for legal migration they want. And I want all countries to abide to the International Refugee Convention, take refugee, grant asylum. But there is importance that the UN and all international bodies also see the difference between regulatory, orderly migration and irregular migration. I think all countries have the right to decide on their own borders. They should pay for it themselves.
Talking of which, Norway had an open gate for refugees and asylum seekers, and I read that 2 years ago you received over 3,000 of those asylum seekers, and last year that number dropped. Why was there a change in that policy?
Well, in 2015 we had this very big influx to Europe. That was a challenge to all of our asylum system. We do not have an open door, but we have a refugee system that if you apply for asylum, you will be scrutinized and decided upon whether you need an asylum. The challenge we have often is to make return policy function. And in fact, Mexico is one of the countries that have the best return policies today, in fact, actually make them happen better than most European countries. Today, all the northern European countries have border control, even if we have free movement of people inside EU. And that means that fewer asylum seekers reaches the border of Norway, because we are the last stop. Next to us it's the North Pole, or it's Russia. If you go right when you come up at the top, you go to Russia, or you end on the North Pole, and it's not so easy. So it's we were the last stop. So we got a large chunk of refugees who came in influx in 2015, challenging for the integration part, for getting them jobs, getting them starting a new life in our societies. And I don't think there's a long-term solution. It's not about Norway or US or EU's policies on migration. It's in fact what type of policies do we have for economic development in other parts of the world. In US is affected by the migration from southern parts of the Americas and goes through Mexico towards that. In Europe it's from Africa, because of lack of jobs, lack of development, or because of conflict in the Middle East. And we need to have, that's why we need to have more work on conflict resolution. We need to have more work on social development, creation of jobs. That's where the sustainable development goals are so important.
Do you still believe, I heard that you're very optimistic about obtaining those goals by 2030. Are you still optimistic about it? Is the world going to achieve reducing poverty by half by that year, and etc.?
I think it's possible to reduce poverty. I think crisis and conflicts is what's the most difficult thing, obstacle towards reducing poverty, because you see countries like Syria bombed back to being one of the poorest countries in the world. It was a middle-income country. I think we can achieve quite a lot of those goals we have put forward. We won't achieve all of them totally, but there's a good working agenda. And if we have policies in countries moving towards both on the international basis, but also on the national basis, for example, fighting inequality, which is important. I think also it gives more support and trust in the authorities in the countries if they feel that there's a mission, there's a way, and that they're following the Sustainable Development Goals.
I ask you this because ever since Donald Trump became president of the U.S. foreign policy has retreated from a number of issues that both Norway and Mexico share within the world, democratic values and the global gender agenda, and etc. Do you still believe that getting to those objectives of the Sustainable Development Goals are possible without the involvement of the U.S.?
Well, I think the U.S. is so much more than the president and his administration. You have to see the whole business world. You have to see the whole the different states, all the large organizations. So if you want to measure U.S. impact on the Sustainable Development Goals, you have to take into account the whole rest of the society there, which really works hard on a lot of these issues. It would become easier if we had the U.S. with us on all of these areas. They are with us on a lot of them, but gender is a difficult issue, especially the question of controlling your own sexuality and the numbers of births you are getting. That's a difficult issue with the Americans for this current administration, but I think it will move ahead anyway. I'm not sure we're going to reach full equality between the sexes in 2030. There's too many obstacles to that, but I think we can move much further. And for women in countries where there are no possibility for private ownership for themselves, for
arranged
marriages and all of that. I think we really can move this agenda much, much further in the next 12 years.
Let me make a very brief pause, and when we come back we'll talk about you being one of the very few women who have become a prime minister or president of your own country. No te vayas, regresamos después de la pausa con esta conversación global de viernes con la primera ministra de Noruega, Erna Solberg. Esto es Foro Global, volvemos después de la pausa. Madam Prime Minister, we were talking about the gender difficulties and the challenges that women face around the world for becoming politicians, for becoming empowered. And in fact, you're one of the very few women who have become presidents or prime ministers of your own country. How has it been? Has it been difficult for you? I also heard an interview in which you claim that it's also easy because women connect more easily with people.
Well, I think, first of all, I'm the second female prime minister in Norway, so it's easier for me because there's been one before, and people get accustomed to it. And there's a lot of women in Norwegian politics. In fact, my Minister of Finance and my Minister of Foreign Affairs is also women. So we are...
Your ambassador to Mexico.
My ambassador to Mexico is also... So there's a lot of women in politics and in running the government and representing us. But I think there are some obstacles, yes. I think there are obstacles in the, still in the view in the beginning that women sometimes have to prove themselves a little bit more than men to be acknowledged at the same level as men, especially when you're a young politician. But I also believe, for me, it's been there have been some easier things. The fact that people connect more easily to a woman than a man, and in a modern time, at least in Norway, modern time politics, it's not just about having authority and running. It's not the test room part that is probably the most important. To build trust, they also have to understand you and feel that you understand their lives. And I think some of the questions journalists ask, which you sometimes can be irritated about, how do you manage to have children and have a career at the same time? It softens the image and it makes people closer. And people feel maybe more connected. And I think that's why I think women in politics is having with modern life and social media, I think in fact there is a future for a more feminine approach to politics.
Do you consider yourself a feminist?
I consider myself a feminist. I'm a conservative, but I've always been a feminist in the context that I believe that there should be the same equal opportunities for women and men. That there's no reason why a woman can't do the same thing as men can do.
Sure. You just came back from Colombia. You visited Colombia, and I saw some pictures of you dancing with the president of Colombia, President Santos. You were also visiting some of the rural areas in which the peace agreements have been implemented. And I know that Norway has been very involved in the peace process in Colombia. Why is so?
Well, Norway has an extensive work on peace negotiation around the world. It's an area where we started, I think, late 80s, beginning of the 90s, based on NGOs and interested diplomats who were starting to work. And we became much more systematic 15 years ago. And in Norway's connection to Colombia wasn't that strong, but there was some very strong NGOs who had been working there. There were Colombians living in Norway who were pushing for Norway to try to find solutions. And when Colombia asked us they first asked us to try with ELN earlier on, and that didn't work. But when they started to think about negotiating with FARC, they asked us to mediate, to be sort of to help them in the work when they were doing that. And together with Cuba, we are also guarantees for the whole peace agreement, meaning that we are in the committees, we are following up. We were those who were facilitating for the process, Cuba and Norway, and now we are following it up. And that means that we have people who are working on the ground. We have NGOs working there. We are supporting retraining programs, the reintegration of former combatants. And I think it was, for me, visiting a school in those areas which was reopened in an area where there had been landmines, where there had been fighting, where people had left, they had to leave their land, and they had now moved back, and there was opening a school with the help of the Norwegian Refugee Council. It shows the dividends of peace. People can go back to their land, to their properties, start life again. And that means it's so much more than just the government and the FARC. It's all of those 5 million refugees that Colombia, in fact, created during the period of conflict.
Norway has also been very involved in Latin America, in the region, and I know that you were also involved in an agreement between Venezuela and Guyana for a border dispute. How do you see the crisis in Venezuela? Because also Norway just recently donated over $1 million for the refugees and asylum seekers in Colombia.
Well, first of all, I think it's terrible to see a country that has one of the richest natural resources in the world, possibility for being a rich, advanced country becoming into a situation like it is today. It's with the lackage of necessities for people. I think it's very troublesome. And of course, I will hope for fair elections. The problem with no international inspectors, nobody coming there, nobody invited to be there, I think it's difficult to find fair elections in Venezuela. I think there have to be an immense international concern about Venezuela not breaking up and becoming a failed state and becoming more turbulent after this election. So I think it's a need for all countries in Latin America, but the rest of the world community to follow through thoroughly up. I think President Maduro is now breaking almost all rules and regulations that a president can do towards his people, and they should find a way to work together to find a fresh start for Venezuela, but it's difficult to see how they will manage it.
Yeah. The presidents of the Americas are reuniting in Lima, in Peru, today as we speak at the Summit of the Americas. And one of the issues is corruption and transparency. And from Mexico to Chile, there have been multiple scandals of corruption. Is Norway in any way interested in, not interested, but afraid of investing in the region, in a region where corruption is possibly very, very well rooted?
I think for Norwegian companies, corruption is one of the reasons why they might be reluctant to invest in a country. Because if you are an international company, you will also have to answer for, at your own stock exchange at home, to the people in the country where is your origin. And in Norway, if you are engaged in corruption in another country, you can be prosecuted in Norway for that, for the Norwegian companies. That's why all Norwegian companies and the Norwegian state owns a bit in a lot of companies and have a non-corruption clause. They are not participating in it, and they're supposed to say no or withdraw from an area if it's impossible to do economic business without corruption.
Is Norway also concerned about the human rights situation in Mexico, the disappearance of students and the killing of journalists?
Yes, and I mentioned and took this up with the discussion with your president during our meeting also, because what is very important, if you want to build a society, you need to build trust in the institutions, and if there is no punity, if there is if criminal activity, killings, disappearance is not investigated well enough and not put to court and not follow up with sentences, people will lose trust in the institutions, and there is a need to that. And the president agreed that there are still areas of Mexico where this situation is too bad. I especially mentioned the journalists, because I think in every democracy, if it really is going to have real democracy, you also have to have those who question what is happening. If it's corruption or if it's different types of bonds that should have been open and transparent about, or looking into criminal organized crime. And still Mexico has a security problem connected to especially drug trafficking.
Yeah. Madam Prime Minister, we're approaching the end of the interview. Two last questions. The first is, Norway has ranked among the first and second the happiest countries in the world. What's the secret?
Well, I'm not sure. Of course, we are a wealthy country. We have, and we have good economic income distribution. So that has a good basis for it. I personally believe that happiness is an individual feeling in a way. It can be satisfaction, it can be different. You can't just measure it on economic parameters or others. But the fact that we have trust in our institution, people believe that your neighbor is not just interested in himself, but it's in fact concerned about the whole community, that the local municipality, the organizations, we have a very large non-governmental sector of the type you do voluntary work in your local community, running the football association, doing the training of the football team for your kids. Nearly all of us do that. Even I have done voluntary active work because my children are participating in different sports activities. It's, I think this binds us together in a community which is more than just the state and institutions and the family.
And one last question, a book recommendation. What are you reading right now?
Well, I've been reading criminal books. Norway has an author called Jo Nesbø, which is very famous internationally. If you like bloody crime, but you have to like quite a lot of deaths, and quite bloody deaths if you read his books. But he is probably the most famous Norwegian crime writer.
We'll look for it. Thank you very much.
Yes.
It's been a privilege.
Thank you.
Thank you. Muchas gracias por habernos acompañado esta noche en esta edición especial de Foro Global. Soy Genaro Lozano, te invito a que continúes con la programación de Foro TV. Nos vemos el domingo en la mesa de debate sin filtro y el próximo lunes en una nueva edición de Foro Global. Buenas noches.